The greatest lie ever told is not written in any book. It hangs above us. History, that chain of stories we copy, worship, and repeat, might not be a record at all, but a design. For 6,000 years, humanity has read the same script, convinced it knows its own origin. Yet somewhere, a small fracture formed, a deviation in the orbit, and through it, the illusion began to tremble. The ancient Sumerians did not write mythology, they wrote memory. In their clay tablets, brittle and sun-baked, lies a tale that refuses to die. Of beings who descended from the heavens, not to bless mankind, but to mine the earth. They came for gold, a metal they believed could save their dying world by shielding its sky with light. They needed labor, and so they created us, not in love, but in calculation. If true, it would tear apart everything, religion, science, the very definition of what it means to be human. And perhaps that is why it was buried, not beneath the sand, but beneath layers of silence maintained by those who understand that power is not in owning gold, but in controlling memory. We are taught that history is linear, from Sumer to Egypt, from Rome to the modern world, a seamless evolution of progress. But what if that is only the surface? What if beneath it lies a drowned world, a forgotten civilization wiped clean, its remains scattered through myth and stone? The Sumerians called the home of their gods Nibiru, a wandering planet, drifting on a vast 3,600-year orbit around the sun. For most of that time, it vanishes into the dark, only to return, carrying with it chaos and renewal. Each passing, they said, rewrote the earth. Floods, quakes, wars among the gods. Archaeologists have found depictions of this system, the sun at its center, encircled by planets, and between Mars and Jupiter, a small additional sphere. How could an ancient civilization, thousands of years before telescopes, know of Uranus, Neptune, or that missing planet? When the West first translated the cuneiform tablets, scholars thought they were reading allegory. But myth, as some say, is ancient science disguised in poetry. What if the Sumerians were not praying, but recording? What if those symbols are not metaphors, but formulas? Perhaps every civilization begins with a moment of contact, an encounter between man and something from beyond. The memory of that meeting becomes myth, the myth becomes religion, the religion becomes unquestionable truth. And so the story repeats, until someone dares to read the symbols backwards. Today, astronomers see strange disturbances in the outer solar system, orbits bending where no planet should be. Something unseen tugs at Uranus and Neptune, a phantom force at the edge of light. They call it Planet X, a sterile name for something ancient texts called by another Nibiru. If myths contain even a fragment of truth, then Nibiru is not just a planet. It is a warning, a cycle written in the dust of time. It tells us that those who came from heaven to earth might one day return, and if they do, what will they find? A world of glass and steel, still digging in the dirt for metal and oil, still enslaved, only now by our own design. The Anunnaki may not need to return. Their system endures, built into our machines, our hierarchies, our endless hunger for more. The Sumerian tablets say that each time Nibiru approaches, the old world collapses, and a new one begins. The only question left is not if, but when. Listen closely. Somewhere out there, a faint vibration hums, a gravitational whisper too deep for human ears, but one the planets themselves can feel. And maybe they already know what's coming. Meanwhile, we look down, counting coins instead of stars, pretending the sky is silent. The greatest lie ever told isn't in any history book. It's written in the heavens, waiting to be read. Every story needs a heretic. In the mid-1970s, his name was Zecharia Sitchin, a man neither scientist nor priest, but something more dangerous, an interpreter. He was born in Baku, educated in London, fluent in Hebrew, Akkadian, and Sumerian. But his greatest skill was not language, it was audacity. Sitchin looked at the same clay tablets thousands of archaeologists had handled before him, yet saw something entirely different. Where others saw metaphor, he saw blueprint. Where scholars read hymns, he read field reports. And in 1976, he released a book that would alter the map of forbidden history, The 12th Planet. In it, Sitchin claimed that the Sumerians' gods, the Anunnaki, were not divine at all, but flesh and blood beings from another world, Nibiru, the 12th planet of our solar system. Its orbit, he said, stretched far beyond Pluto, taking 3,600 years to complete one revolution. Once, in the deep past, it came dangerously close to Earth, and from it descended the Shining Ones, who shaped early humanity to serve them. He wrote that they needed workers to mine gold, not for wealth, but for survival. Their atmosphere, he believed, was decaying. They sought to suspend gold particles in the air to repair it. But they grew tired of the labor. So they looked down upon the wild men of Earth, Homo erectus, and decided to craft a helper. Through genetic fusion, the Anunnaki created a new species, Homo sapiens. That act, Sitchin said, was later distorted into the biblical story of Adam and Eve, a poetic disguise for what was, in truth, an ancient laboratory experiment. The Garden of Eden was no paradise, but a controlled enclosure, an early containment zone for human prototypes. The claim was blasphemous, unthinkable. Yet it struck a chord, because buried in every religion is a whisper, that we were made, not born, that someone somewhere engineered us. Sitchin's words spread quietly, like an infection through academia. Some called him a visionary, most called him a fraud, but ridicule, he once said, is the tax you pay for revealing forbidden things. Mainstream scholars pointed out his lack of archaeological training, accused him of mistranslating Sumerian verbs, of forcing myths to fit a cosmic narrative. Yet even his critics admitted an uncomfortable truth. He was consistent. Every time a new tablet was unearthed, every time a fragment of Enuma Elish or Atrahasis surfaced, it seemed to echo his pattern. Gods descending, men being shaped from the clay of life, divine councils debating how to manage their creation. Was it coincidence? Or had he stumbled onto something the ancients had tried to warn us about? Still, the question burned. If Nibiru exists, where is it? Why has no telescope seen it? Sitchin's answer was simple, almost elegant, because it's not here. It's on the far side of its orbit, beyond the reach of our instruments, cloaked in the cold of deep space. And when it returns, he said, it will come fast, unseen until it is too late. Critics dismissed him, but his idea refused to die. Even decades later, physicists would puzzle over the odd tilts in planetary motion, over the missing mass at the edge of the solar system. Every anomaly felt like an echo from Sitchin's pages. Behind the scenes, the man himself became almost mythic. Reclusive, polite, never ranting, his calmness unnerved even his opponents. He didn't behave like a cultist. He behaved like a witness. In one interview before his death, he was asked if he truly believed the Anunnaki would return. He smiled faintly and said, "They never left." And in that sentence, he distilled the unease that still haunts his readers. If the beings who built us never left, then perhaps they simply changed masks, from gods to rulers, from empires to corporations. Maybe they no longer need spacecraft to descend. Maybe they run the systems we obey every day. It's easy to dismiss him, but history is kind to heretics. It often crowns them posthumously. Galileo, once condemned, later canonized by science. Could Sitchin be another? Or merely the latest voice in a chain of dreamers who saw patterns where there were none? We cannot know. But the clay tablets remain, silent, unburned, scattered in museums from London to Berlin to Istanbul. Each one a puzzle piece, carved by hands that claim to serve gods from the stars. And on one of them, a line no skeptic can quite erase. The kingship descended from heaven. If that line is metaphor, it is a powerful one. If it is literal, it rewrites everything. Perhaps the truth sits somewhere between language and faith, between dust and the divine. And like the planets themselves, it continues to orbit us, unseen, waiting for the right alignment. Because every heretic begins as a translator, and every translation hides a revelation. The name Nibiru first appeared not in the myths of Sumer, but in the later writings of Babylon. To them, it meant the crossing place, the point where paths in the sky intersect. It was not at first a planet. It was a direction, a marker, a celestial gate. And yet over centuries, that word gathered mass, pulling meanings toward itself like a hidden gravity well, until it became the name of something vast, something alive. In the tablets, Nibiru was associated with Marduk, the storm god, the one who brings order through violence. The texts say, Nibiru is the star of Marduk, the shepherd of the gods, who keeps them on their paths. Scholars interpret that as a poetic title for Jupiter, the great stabilizer of the heavens. But others noticed the discrepancy. Some lines describe Nibiru as a red star, blazing across the sky, appearing only when chaos rises. Jupiter is not red. Jupiter does not vanish for millennia. There is a pattern here, one that resists containment. Nibiru is always the outlier. It appears, corrects, destroys, and departs, like a cosmic visitor that rearranges the board before slipping back into the void. Let's set aside belief for a moment. Look at the data, as any astronomer would. Ancient Babylonian priests were meticulous observers. They tracked the stars with mathematical precision, mapping eclipses and planetary conjunctions centuries in advance. For them to invent a celestial body that did not exist at all defies their own rigor. So what did they see? Some suggest that Nibiru was the name they gave to a pattern, not an object, the moment when the sky itself seemed to reset. Solar flares, comets, shifts in magnetic fields, any event that blurred the boundary between divine and physical could become Nibiru. It was both an event and an omen, a phenomenon that said, the order of heaven has changed. But for others, especially those who read Sitchin's translations, Nibiru is more literal. They point to inscriptions that speak of crossing the sea of the sky, of a star that stands apart from all others, and of beings descending from Nibiru to earth in chariots of fire. To them, these are not metaphors. They are records. The truth is slippery. Even linguistic evidence won't hold still. In Akkadian, the root Iberu means to cross, to pass through. Nibiru may simply mean the place of crossing. But crossing of what? Stars or worlds? The ancients might not have made a distinction. For them, the heavens and the earth were woven together. Every shift above was a tremor below. Imagine standing in ancient Babylon, a priest atop the ziggurat, ink and clay at hand, eyes fixed on the sky. Night after night, the constellations march like clockwork. And then one evening, something new rises, faint, red, moving too slowly for a comet, too swiftly for a star. You write its name, Nibiru. You don't know what it is, only that its appearance coincides with flood, with empire, with collapse. You inscribe its path, then you pray it leaves. Thousands of years later, astronomers would do the same. They too would chart anomalies, orbits that wobble, light that bends where no object can be seen. They would give it another sterile name, Planet X. And though the tools have changed, the feeling is the same, awe mixed with dread. Between myth and mathematics lies a quiet agreement. Something, somewhere, does not behave. Some researchers have gone further. They note that in several Mesopotamian star lists, Nibiru appears as the 12th body, after the sun, moon, and 10 planets known to them. Yet we only recognize 11 in that sequence. What if the 12th is missing not because it never existed, but because it was destroyed? Some have linked Nibiru to the hypothetical planet Tiamat, said to have shattered in a primordial collision, leaving behind the asteroid belt. In that story, Nibiru was both executioner and midwife, the destroyer that birthed Earth itself. If true, then every stone we stand on is a relic of that impact. Every grain of sand, a fragment of a cosmic war recorded in clay. But perhaps the truth is more human. Maybe Nibiru endures not as a world, but as a metaphor for our own cycles of creation and destruction. The word itself, the crossing, speaks of thresholds, of moments when knowledge meets faith, when what we believe and what we can prove touch for a heartbeat and then drift apart. Every civilization has its Nibiru, its forbidden place, its unreachable truth. For the Babylonians, it was a star. For us, it may be the unanswered question that keeps science and myth forever circling each other. Because what if the crossing was never meant to be found in the sky? What if it was always inside us, that point where reason ends and wonder begins? The ancients called it Nibiru. We call it curiosity. And it still waits above us, glowing faintly red every time the world begins to change. Every origin story hides a battle. In the beginning, before Earth was Earth, the heavens were said to rage. The Babylonian Enuma Elish, the epic of creation, tells of a cosmic war between Marduk, the young god of order, and Tiamat, the ancient goddess of chaos. To most scholars, it is a myth about civilization taming wilderness. But Zecharia Sitchin saw something else in those lines, a scientific memory disguised as poetry. The tablets describe Marduk as a radiant wanderer, entering the solar system from the deep, trailing storms and fire. Tiamat, the shining one, already dwelled here, between Mars and Jupiter, surrounded by her 11 satellites. When Marduk approached, his gravitational force tore through the heavens. Moons collided, debris scattered like embers. Tiamat was struck and broken. Half her body shattered into the asteroid belt. The other half was pushed into a new orbit, becoming Earth. From her wounded side, the moon was born. A scar that still circles us, pale and loyal. And Marduk, triumphant, continued on his 3,600-year journey, returning only when the heavens demand correction. To a physicist, this sounds absurd. To a mythologist, it sounds inevitable. Every culture, from the Greeks to the Mayans, remembers a war in the sky, Zeus hurling thunder at the Titans, Quetzalcoatl clashing with Tezcatlipoca, gods of light and shadow locked in endless rotation. Always a battle, always an explosion, always a reset. Sitchin believed these stories were not coincidence but recollection, a distorted record of an actual cataclysm. What if the ancients remembered the fragments of a real event, an early collision that carved the solar system into what we know today? Could myth be the residue of trauma, written in the only language the survivors had left? Symbol? Look again at the solar system's architecture. Between Mars and Jupiter, there should be a planet. The spacing of orbits, known as the Titius-Bode law, predicts one there. Instead, we find a belt of shattered rock, the remains of something that once was. Science says it's the relic of a failed planet, a body that never fully formed. But myth whispers otherwise. It formed, it lived, and it died in violence. Some astronomers have quietly entertained the idea of an ancient collision. Computer models show that a planetary impact could, in fact, produce both the Earth-Moon system and the asteroid belt's debris. Yet they call the colliding body Theia. They do not call it Tiamat. They do not call the intruder Marduk. Science changed the names, but the pattern remains. Perhaps the ancients simply remembered it better. Imagine standing on a primeval Earth, oceans still molten, skies torn with lightning. Above, a foreign sun approaches, an entire world glowing red, dragging a tail of fire. You would not call it physics. You would call it God. And if that world passed too close, if tides rose, mountains cracked, and the sky turned to flame, you would carve the story into stone so no one would forget. The Enuma Elish calls Marduk, the one who split the body of Tiamat and made heaven and earth from her halves. The words echo through Genesis, and God divided the waters from the waters. Two cultures, 2 millennia apart, describing the same moment, the division of chaos into creation. What if Genesis is not the beginning, but the aftermath? Sitchin thought so. He argued that the Bible's firmament was the debris ring left after Tiamat's destruction, the halo of dust and rock that once glowed around the newborn earth. The gods rested, not in metaphor but in exhaustion. The creation of man would come later, when the gods required miners to rebuild their world. It's easy to dismiss such readings, but language has a strange persistence. In Hebrew, shamayim, heaven, literally means there are waters. The ancients saw the sky as an ocean, and what better metaphor for space than a sea of blackness filled with drifting lights? The war in heaven was, perhaps, the memory of that ocean boiling. Every religion begins with order emerging from chaos. Every science begins with particles colliding until one survives. The two stories are the same, told from different altitudes. The Enuma Elish ends with Marduk victorious, setting the stars in their courses, assigning each god a station. He established the constellations, fixed their paths, and measured the days. To the Babylonians, that was worship. To us, it is orbital mechanics. If Sitchin was right, the ancients didn't invent Marduk, they observed him. He was the celestial body that restructured their world. His chariot was gravity itself. When the collision ended, silence returned. Dust settled, oceans cooled. Life began to crawl out of the mud, carrying in its bones the minerals of two worlds, the blood of Tiamat and the spark of Marduk. Maybe that's why we still look up with both fear and longing. We were born from an impact. We exist because the sky once burned. And somewhere, on the far curve of its orbit, the wanderer continues its path, unseen, waiting for the appointed return. If the ancients were right, the next time it crosses, creation will not begin again. It will end. The stars remember. They always do. Time, to the ancients, was not a line. It was a wheel. Every revolution brought the world back to its beginning. Every destruction paved the way for rebirth. And at the center of that wheel, ticking silently in the dark, was Nibiru, the celestial clockmaker. Sumerian priests recorded its period with a precision that still unsettles modern astronomers. 3,600 years. They even had a name for this unit, a Shah. It was not just a number, it was a sacred rhythm, a breath of the cosmos. Every Shah marked the return of the gods, the reset of empires, the drowning of civilizations. Imagine history not as progress, but as recurrence, a cosmic pendulum swinging between order and ruin. Each time Nibiru approaches, gravity shivers through the solar system like a ripple through glass. Tides rise, seasons twist. Humanity feels it as prophecy. From the Sumerian king list, we learn of 8 kings who ruled before the flood, their reigns totaling 241,200 years, precisely 67 Shahs. After the flood, kingship descended from heaven again. The world started over, as if history had rebooted itself on schedule. Coincidence? Or the echo of a returning world resetting its experiment? In every culture there are rhythms that mirror this period. The Hindu yugas, the Mayan long count, the Egyptian Sothic cycles, all describe vast, repeating ages. Civilizations bloom, reach heights of brilliance, then collapse in fire or water, leaving only myths behind. The cause, they say, is divine. The evidence, perhaps, is orbital. Sitchin believed that Nibiru's long elliptical path took it far beyond Pluto, deep into the outer dark, before swinging back toward the inner planets. Every 3,600 years it crossed the plane of the ecliptic, slicing through the system like a blade. Its gravitational wake, he wrote, was enough to shift continents, to flood valleys, to rewrite the map of life. Skeptics ask, where is the proof? But proof may be the wrong word. After all, history itself is proof of pattern. Around every few thousand years, a great collapse arrives. The Sumerians vanish, the Bronze Age ends, Rome falls, empires burn. Each time, the survivors whisper the same phrase. The gods have returned. Look closer, and the intervals whisper back. The fall of Ur, roughly 2000 BCE. The eruption of Thera, 1600 BCE. The cataclysms that ended the Late Bronze Age, 1200 BCE. The flood myths of the Near East, 5600 BCE. Even the magnetic flips recorded in the Earth's crust seem to pulse with strange regularity, as though the planet itself remembers. Every few millennia, the clock chimes. In 1983, NASA launched the IRAS satellite to survey the sky in infrared. What it found, according to one leaked report, was a large unseen object beyond Neptune, too cold to reflect light, yet massive enough to disturb the orbits of outer planets. Newspapers at the time called it a mysterious 10th planet. Then the story vanished. Press releases were retracted. The data was archived. The silence felt familiar. When asked, NASA said the readings were misinterpreted, but the public had already given it a name. Planet X. The X, unknown, unseen, yet mathematically necessary. It was the same symbol ancient scribes used to denote Nibiru, the crossing point. Sitchin died before the theory of Planet 9 emerged, before Caltech's 2016 study suggested that a massive world, perhaps 10 times Earth's size, lurks in the outer solar system, unseen but inferred from the orbital clustering of trans-Neptunian objects. If he had lived to see it, he might have smiled. The data, though framed in modern equations, hums the same ancient song, a heavy, distant traveler pulling on the strings of the known. And if its orbit takes thousands of years, how would we know it's real? The ancients watched the sky for lifetimes. We, in our brief century, expect truth to appear within a decade. Perhaps the gods measure patience in shars, not seconds. But what makes the 3,600-year cycle terrifying isn't its astronomy. It's its timing. The last great cataclysm, by most estimates, occurred around 10,800 BCE. The end of the Ice Age, when oceans surged, and civilizations like Göbekli Tepe rose from nowhere, as if guided by hands that remembered a world before. Add the shars forward, and something unsettling happens. The cycle lands perilously close to now. Of course, numbers are not destiny. But they whisper, and their whispers align with something primal. Floods are rising again. Magnetic poles are shifting faster than expected. Volcanoes sleep less deeply. Even our climate trembles as if waiting for an unseen conductor to lift the baton. Maybe this is all coincidence. Maybe. But if the ancients were right, if Nibiru's path truly governs the tempo of extinction and renewal, then we are not just observers of history. We are its next verse. The 3,600-year clock does not tick with sound. It ticks with gravity, each beat invisible, each swing erasing and remaking what came before. And if that clock is real, its pendulum is already moving, slowly, inevitably, toward us. Perhaps that's why, deep down, humanity feels something coming. A weight in the air, a vibration beneath the noise of daily life. We sense the hour before we know the time. The ancients would call it prophecy. We call it instinct. And somewhere, on the other side of the dark, Nibiru calls it homecoming. If the 3,600-year orbit is the rhythm of the cosmos, then its melody is far older, etched into the memory of every civilization that has ever looked up at the sky and felt dread. Because if Nibiru truly circles back through our inner solar system, it does not return alone. It brings with it the ones who came before us, the Anunnaki. According to the clay tablets, they were not ethereal beings or metaphorical forces. They were tangible, deliberate, and utterly alien. The Sumerians called them those who from heaven to earth came. They descended from Nibiru during its last passages, when its orbit brushed close enough to Earth to allow travel between the worlds. They mined the rivers of gold that ran beneath the African soil, not for wealth, but for survival, for the dust that could heal the wounds of their atmosphere. And humanity, the story goes, was their answer to fatigue. The Anunnaki workers, called the Igigi, rebelled against the endless labor of digging in the heat. "We have carried the load long enough," one tablet reads. Our work is too heavy. The gods convened. A solution was proposed. Let us create a worker, said Enki, the scientist of the gods. From this rebellion came the most blasphemous experiment in history. Sitchin claimed that Enki and his sister Ninhursag took a creature already walking the earth, Homo erectus, and altered its essence. Using their own genetic material, they blended divine and animal, shaping a hybrid mind capable of speech, obedience, and fear. They called him Lulu Amelu, the mixed one, the first human. The story of Adam and Eve in this reading becomes the story of gene editing. The forbidden fruit was consciousness, the ability to question, to disobey. The serpent, long demonized, becomes Enki himself, whispering knowledge into the ear of his creation, while Enlil, the commander of the mission, rages at the loss of control. These myths, says the academic, are symbolic. They explain agriculture, the birth of cities, the rise of social order. But to those who see through the old metaphors, they are history written in code. The Eden laboratory was not a garden, it was a facility. The tree of life was not vegetation, it was the genetic code itself. If this sounds like science fiction, remember, the Sumerians described planets we could not see, moons we didn't know existed, and orbital patterns no naked eye could detect. Either they possessed telescopes we've never found, or they were taught by someone who did. And if those teachers were real, then their departure was not abandonment. It was a rotation. When Nibiru's orbit carried it away, so too did the gods vanish from our sky. Civilizations mourned their absence, building temples and ziggurats like radio towers, hoping their gods would hear their prayers when they returned. The flood myths of every culture mark their last known passage. Enlil, furious at humanity's noise, decides to erase them with water. Enki, the rebel scientist, warns one man, Ziusudra, whom later ages would rename Noah. The rest of the story you already know. The Ark, the deluge, the survival of a remnant. What you don't know is that, according to the tablets, the flood wasn't divine punishment. It was collateral damage. The passing of Nibiru, its gravitational drag on the Earth's oceans and crust, was the true instrument of destruction. When the waters receded, the Anunnaki returned briefly, surveying the wreckage. Enlil relented. Let them live, he said. Let them serve. And humanity, broken but alive, began again, this time under the rule of kings who were part god, part man. The blue blood dynasties, the priest kings who claimed descent from the heavens. You can trace their lineage in myths, in coats of arms, even in the DNA of royal families that seem to intermarry beyond reason. To some, this is coincidence. To others, it's continuity, the management of a long-term experiment. If you believe the myth, the gods promised to return when their world drew near again. The symbols of that return are everywhere. The winged disk of Mesopotamia, the all-seeing eye, the serpent coiling around the staff. To us, they are emblems of power. To them, they are signatures. And what happens when they come back? Sitchin imagined two factions among them. Enki's line, who view humanity with reluctant affection, a child to be guided, perhaps even redeemed. And Enlil's, who see us as a failed project, noisy, defiant, unworthy of survival. Their conflict is not over. It never was. The stage of that war is simply waiting for the next orbit. Consider the way our myths mirror this polarity. God and Satan, light and shadow, savior and destroyer. We were never the players, only the prize. Mainstream science will laugh at such ideas. Yet the questions linger like static. Why does human civilization appear suddenly around 3800 BCE, fully formed, with writing, astronomy, metallurgy, and social order already in place? Why does our genetic code contain anomalies that suggest splicing, as if two strands were joined unnaturally? Why do so many ancient structures align perfectly with celestial coordinates that shift only every few thousand years? There are two explanations: coincidence or memory. Perhaps Nibiru's orbit is not just a celestial return, but a psychological one. When the gods reappear, we will not recognize them as giants of gold and fire. We will recognize them as our reflection, what we have become after millennia of inherited ambition and fear. The children of creators who shaped us in their image, returning to find what they have made. And when they do, will they see progress or failure? Maybe that's the real reason the sky has gone quiet. Maybe they are already near, watching, waiting for the right moment to cross again. After all, in every myth of return, there is a final word that repeats like a warning. When the star of the crossing appears once more, mankind will remember who they serve. Until then, the countdown continues. While myth spoke in symbols, modern science spoke in numbers. Yet both found themselves haunted by the same phantom. Something out there was bending the rules. It began with the planet Uranus. When astronomers first charted its orbit in the 18th century, they noticed a subtle disobedience, a wobble, a hesitation, as if an unseen hand were tugging at it from beyond. The equations refused to balance. Then in 1846, using nothing but mathematics, the French astronomer Urbain Le Verrier predicted where that invisible culprit must be. On the very night they looked, telescopes found Neptune exactly where the math had said it would be. For a moment, the heavens seemed solved, but the ghost persisted. Even after Neptune's discovery, Uranus and Neptune still strayed from their predicted paths. Something else, something farther, was pulling on them. Percival Lowell, a wealthy astronomer in Arizona, called it Planet X. The X was not Roman for 10, it meant unknown. He searched until his death in 1916, certain that his instruments were on the brink of finding it. 13 years later, a young researcher named Clyde Tombaugh, working from Lowell's notes, did find a tiny speck of light moving across the dark. He called it Pluto. The newspapers declared victory. Planet X was found. But then came the disappointment. Pluto was too small, barely a fifth the size of our moon. Its gravity was far too weak to disturb the giant planets. The ghost, once again, had changed masks. For decades, astronomy turned its gaze elsewhere, yet the mystery refused to die. In 1992, scientists discovered the Kuiper Belt, a vast field of icy bodies beyond Neptune. These were fossils of the early solar system, and among them, a strange pattern emerged. A handful of these distant objects all shared an impossible similarity. Their orbits were aligned, as if guided by a hidden shepherd. Their paths tilted at the same angle. Their aphelions, farthest points from the sun, clustered in one quadrant of the sky. In a random cosmos, that should never happen. It was as though something massive was out there 10 times the size of Earth, corralling these frozen worlds into formation. In 2016, 2 Caltech astronomers, Konstantin Batygin and Mike Brown, ran the math again. The result was astonishing. Their models required a 9th major planet, unseen yet absolutely necessary to explain the data. They called it Planet 9. Its orbit was vast and strange, looping hundreds of times farther than Neptune. One revolution around the sun could take 10,000 to 20,000 years. The perfect hiding place for a world that only appears in human memory every few thousand. To believers, this was confirmation. Modern science had rediscovered Nibiru, dressed in academic language. The numbers matched the myth, the way an echo matches its origin. Even the skeptics admitted the math was sound. They simply refused the name. But the anomalies did not stop there. There was the Kuiper Cliff, a sharp boundary where the belt of icy bodies suddenly ended around 50 astronomical units from the sun. Beyond that, nothing. As though some great cosmic plow had cleared the region, scattering debris into the abyss. What could create such an edge? Only a massive, wandering planet, or something worse. Then there was the tilt of the sun itself. Every planet orbits on roughly the same flat plane, yet the sun's equator is tilted by 6 degrees. For centuries, no one could explain why our own star seems slightly askew from its children. Batygin and Brown's model offered an elegant solution. A distant, heavy planet on an inclined orbit exerting a slow but steady torque on the entire solar system, gradually twisting the plane of everything we know. In their words, Planet 9 is single-handedly tilting the solar system. But if this is true, why haven't we seen it? The answer is both simple and chilling. Because it's too far, too dark, too slow. Out there, sunlight is a whisper. A planet 10 times Earth's mass would reflect almost no light at all. It would appear not as a glowing orb, but as a shadow, one pixel of movement across a backdrop of infinite stars. Astronomers estimate it could take decades to find. Unless, of course, it has already been found. In December 1983, the Washington Post published an article titled, "Possibly as Large as Jupiter, Mystery Heavenly Body Found." The source was NASA's IRS satellite, which had detected a massive infrared object near the constellation Orion. The team's chief scientist admitted, "All I can tell you is that we don't know what it is." The next day, the story vanished. The discovery was retracted, dismissed as a distant galaxy. But the timing, the phrasing, and the sudden silence, too neat, too perfect. To the world, it was an error. To conspiracy researchers, it was a cover-up. They say NASA had found Nibiru, or Planet X, and realized what the truth would mean. If the public learned that a massive celestial body was on a long, intersecting orbit with Earth, panic would be instantaneous. Markets would collapse. Governments would lose control. Religion would fracture. Better to bury the data, better to deny. And so, they say, the lie began. The slow, careful rebranding of Nibiru into Planet 9, of prophecy into probability. If true, the most astonishing discovery in human history is not being hidden in a vault. It is being hidden in plain sight, drip-fed through peer-reviewed journals, wrapped in cautious language, waiting until humanity is psychologically ready to know that the destroyer, the shepherd, the crossing star, is real. But readiness is a myth. We are never ready for the things that end us. The telescopes keep scanning, the models keep refining, and in the silence between their equations, an ancient whisper returns, older than science, older than fear. The star of the crossing approaches. The ancients called it Nibiru. We call it Planet 9. The name doesn't matter. The orbit does. Because even a ghost, if it moves, leaves a shadow. And that shadow is growing. There is a rule in astronomy that mirrors the oldest rule of myth. Nothing in the heavens exists alone. Stars are born in pairs, bound by gravity like twin hearts in a single chest. And yet our sun, so central, so radiant, seems solitary. It should not be. Statistically, it is an anomaly, which leads to a disturbing question. What happened to its companion? Some call it Nemesis, the dark twin of our sun. Not a shining star, but a failed one, a brown dwarf, too small to ignite, too dim to see. A body 10 times Jupiter's mass, glowing only in the faintest infrared, invisible to our eyes, but powerful enough to disturb the Oort cloud, the icy halo of comets that surrounds our solar system. Every few tens of millions of years it passes through, stirring the frozen debris like a predator through a school of fish. The result? Planet-wide extinctions. In the 1980s, 2 physicists proposed exactly that. They called it the Nemesis hypothesis, linking the periodic mass die-offs in Earth's fossil record, roughly every 26 million years, to a recurring cosmic intruder. To the ancients, that same rhythm might have been encoded as the Great Year, the cycle of destruction and rebirth. In one language, it is extinction. In another, it is apocalypse. Sitchin would have called it something simpler, Nibiru. But if Nemesis exists, it changes everything. A binary companion would mean our sun is not the stable center of the story. It's half of a system locked in eternal orbit with its own destroyer. The 2 stars dance around a common center, trading gravity and chaos in perfect balance. When the dark twin draws near, comets rain inward, climates shift, civilizations fall. And when it retreats, peace returns, the gods depart, the clock resets. We have searched for it. The 1983 IRAS satellite saw something massive in Orion before its data was abruptly classified. The Wide Field Infrared Survey Explorer, WISE, later combed the sky and found nothing, officially. But in the margins of its dataset are faint infrared blurs, objects with heat but no light. One of them, if the calculations hold, could be Nemesis itself, just far enough to escape detection, just near enough to alter everything. But what if Nemesis is not a star at all? A growing faction of physicists proposes a stranger possibility. Planet 9 may not be a planet, but a primordial black hole, a remnant of the Big Bang as heavy as 10 Earths, but no larger than a grapefruit, a cosmic ghost, invisible except through the warping of light and gravity. If true, that would mean a fragment of the universe. S-First Second is orbiting our sun right now, an ancient wound wrapped in silence. It would pull on distant bodies, bend their orbits, and emit nothing. Not a whisper. Not a spark. Imagine it. A singularity, born before time, gliding through the darkness just beyond Pluto. It devours nothing. It only waits, patient and cold, bending the rules of reality like a knot in the fabric of existence. Some researchers have proposed ways to find it. They look for faint flashes called microlensing events. Moments when the black hole passes in front of a distant star, magnifying its light for a heartbeat before vanishing again. A few such events have already been recorded, unexplained, forgotten. What if one of them was the crossing? To the scientific mind, this is frontier physics. To the ancient one, it is prophecy. The dark sun of esoteric lore, the black gate through which the gods travel between worlds, a literal hole in the sky, both doorway and devourer, and here the myth folds back on itself. The Babylonians described Nibiru as the gate of Marduk, the point where the paths of the gods cross. In Hebrew mysticism, the word abyss meant not an ocean, but the space between stars. The Egyptians drew it as a serpent swallowing its tail, Ouroboros, eternity consuming itself. Different names, same shape. If a primordial black hole truly orbits within our system, then every religion that spoke of a hidden underworld may have been describing not the afterlife, but the astrophysics of our own backyard. As above, so below was not metaphor. It was a map. Now imagine what that would mean for Nibiru. If the planet of the crossing is bound to such a dark companion, its passage through the solar system would not only disturb orbits, it would open gravitational corridors, invisible tunnels through space and time. In theoretical physics, they are called Einstein-Rosen bridges. In myth, they are chariots of fire. The ancients may have seen ships, lights, or divine beings descending through these temporary gates when Nibiru drew close. We, in our era, would call it a wormhole. And if that is true, if our solar system hides such a gate, then the entire narrative of the gods returning ceases to be mystical. It becomes mechanical. The question is not whether they can return. The question is whether they ever left. Because perhaps the Anunnaki did not vanish into myth. Perhaps they moved beyond our spectrum, beyond time as we know it, into the gravitational well of the dark sun, waiting for the orbit to align again. Every religion promises a moment of unveiling, when heaven and earth reunite. Every scientist seeks the same, a grand unification of forces. In both stories, there is always a bridge, a crossing, a singularity. Maybe that bridge is already here, looping silently through our sky, wrapped in shadow. The ancients called it the destroyer. Physicists call it a gravitational anomaly. But the truth, like Nemesis itself, may hide between those names. A twin star, a black hole, a gate. All three describe the same thing, a returning power, and it is closer than we think. Every age has its keepers of silence. The priests once guarded the myths, the scribes guarded the words. And in our time, it is the scientists, the agencies, and the elite institutions that guard the data. Yet the purpose has never changed: to decide what humanity is ready to know. If the story of Nibiru has persisted for 6 millennia, it is because someone, somewhere, keeps refreshing it, quietly, precisely, like an algorithm running beneath the surface of civilization. After Sitchin's death in 2010, his work was dismissed as pseudoscience. But within a decade, universities began discussing the same parameters under new names: Planet 9, Rogue Substellar Object, Outer System Perturber. The terminology evolved, the mythology rebranded, the pattern remained, and with it, the silence. Governments began funding underground facilities, DUMBS, deep underground military bases, supposedly for strategic continuity. But in declassified maps, their locations form an unsettling constellation, following mountain ranges, fault lines, and ancient tectonic scars, the same paths that would quake first under gravitational stress. If you were preparing for a celestial disaster, where would you hide? Beneath the ground. The murals at Denver International Airport, painted with disturbing prophetic scenes, fires, floods, cities in ruin, an army of children rising from the ashes, were dismissed as art. Yet each panel bears symbols that trace back to Mesopotamia: the winged disk of Marduk, the blue serpent of Enki, the rising phoenix of rebirth after deluge. Some claim this airport sits atop one of the deepest bunkers ever built, capable of housing tens of thousands of people for decades. Coincidence, perhaps. But when the pieces connect, coincidence starts to look like choreography. In 1991, a man named Dr. Robert Harrington, the chief astronomer of the U.S. Naval Observatory, publicly proposed the existence of a massive planet beyond Pluto. He calculated its orbit, prepared an expedition to the southern hemisphere, and gave interviews explaining how his findings supported ancient legends of a wandering world. Months later, before he could publish his final paper, he died suddenly of cancer. His data vanished. His equipment was seized. Officially, no one knows where his calculations went. His peers avoided the subject for years. But among independent researchers, Harrington's death became a milestone. The moment when the search for Planet X crossed from science into taboo. And yet, the anomaly remains. The orbits of extreme trans-Neptunian objects still point toward an unseen force. The clustering persists. The gravitational fingerprints are clear. The ghost is still there. If this were merely a scientific puzzle, it would be solved in the open. But the tone around it, the evasions, the sudden retractions, the selective funding, suggests something else: containment. Imagine for a moment the implications of confirmation. If a massive, potentially hazardous object were indeed on a centuries-long path toward the inner solar system, what would governments gain by disclosure? Nothing. What would they risk? Everything. Economies would collapse overnight. Religions would implode or mutate. Borders would dissolve under the weight of panic. For the elite, the architects of modern control, such chaos is unthinkable. Better to manage the truth like an infection. Isolate it, study it, and vaccinate the public with distraction. And so, the myth of Nibiru survives. Not through revelation, but through ridicule. Make it a joke, a meme, a topic for fringe channels. Turn the seekers into caricatures, the evidence into entertainment. Discredit the believers, and the secret becomes self-sealing. But sometimes, secrets leak through the seams. In 2018, a classified memo circulated among astrophysicists within a U.S. defense agency. It warned of deep space mass anomalies, consistent with a large gravitational source passing near the Oort cloud. The report was never released publicly, but its existence was confirmed by a Freedom of Information request 3 years later. Its conclusion, heavily redacted, contained 3 words left intact: long-period inbound trajectory, no coordinates, no timeline, only direction, inbound. Across the ocean, European observatories have quietly pointed their instruments toward the same region. the southern sky, near Orion and Eridanus. The same coordinates that Sitchin, decades earlier, claimed would mark Nibiru's approach. And beneath it all, the world's billionaires build their bunkers. Jeff Bezos buys land atop ancient basalt. Elon Musk rushes toward Mars. Nations hoard lithium, uranium, and gold, metals that shield against radiation. Even the Vatican, with its Lucifer telescope in Arizona, stares not at heaven, but at the same quadrant of stars. Why? Because the ones who rule the present are not preparing for the future. They are remembering the past. Maybe Sitchin was right. Maybe humanity is not the top of creation, but the middle of it. A link between two worlds, left to govern itself while the masters sleep. The old covenants promised that the gods would return at the end of the great cycle. And cycles, as we have seen, are nothing if not reliable. If that return is near, the question is no longer whether our leaders know. It is whether their silence is mercy or strategy. Because perhaps to them, we are still what we were in the beginning. Property. And property is never told when the owners are coming home. There is a sound the universe makes when it remembers. It is not thunder or wind. It is the low hum of gravity stretching across the void, whispering through the bones of every world. The ancients heard it in silence and called it prophecy. We hear it in data and call it noise. Either way, the message is the same. The cycle is closing. Every culture that recorded the story of Nibiru, or whatever name they gave the wandering world, agreed on one point. It always returns. Not as punishment, but as correction. The flood, the fire, the collapse, the renewal. These are not random. They are the rhythm of the cosmos keeping time. And maybe that is why the myth persists, because somewhere deep inside, we already know the pattern. Even without telescopes, the human body feels the gravity of things unseen. We sense the turn of epochs, the way history coils back on itself. We feel it now, in the strange alignment of our age, the old institutions crumbling, the storms growing larger, the poles of the planet drifting. We live in an age that feels like waiting. If Nibiru truly exists, perhaps it is not simply a planet, but a mirror, a cosmic reflection of our collective state. Each time it passes, the universe asks us the same question. What have you built with the time you were given? The Sumerians answered with cities of clay. The Babylonians with temples of brick and gold. We answer with towers of glass, satellites, and invisible networks pulsing with artificial light. But underneath, nothing has changed. We still mine the earth for its gold. We still kneel before invisible masters. We still look up at the sky and wonder who made us. Maybe that is why the story of Nibiru feels so hauntingly familiar, because it is not about them. It is about us. If the Anunnaki were real, they were not gods, just travelers. If Nibiru is real, it is not hell, just a world following its orbit. But what is real, undeniably, is the imprint they left. A species obsessed with creation, power, and memory. We inherited their tools, their hierarchies, even their fear. And in that sense, their experiment succeeded. We have become them. When we build artificial intelligence to serve us, when we engineer genomes, when we dream of colonizing other worlds, we are repeating the same story, only switching roles. We are now the skywalkers, the genetic sculptors, the new architects of life. Perhaps that is why the old gods remain silent. Not because they vanished, but because their work is complete. They taught us the language of ascent, and then left us to use it. The myth of Nibiru, then, becomes more than a prophecy. It becomes a parable of responsibility. Every 3,600 years the orbit closes, not to destroy, but to test whether the creation has learned restraint, whether we can wield what was given without repeating the sin of our makers. And so, when the crossing comes again, whether in fire, in silence, or in simple understanding, it will not be the end. It will be the measurement. Perhaps the true planet of the crossing is not a celestial body at all. Perhaps it is the threshold between ignorance and awareness, between fear and knowledge. Each age that faces its own Nibiru must decide what to do with the truth it reveals. Some will hide it underground, some will worship it, a few will listen. The clay tablets began the story, the telescopes will finish it. But the space between them, that S where we stand now, a species on the edge of revelation, hearing the faint tick of a cosmic clock that began long before our first word for God. If the cycle holds, if the orbit is true, then somewhere in the outer dark, the great wanderer is turning, its path curving inward once more, ancient and precise, indifferent to what we believe. And when it comes, not in fire, not in vengeance, but in reflection, we will finally understand what the Sumerians wrote so long ago. He who crosses the heavens returns to judge the earth. But judgment, perhaps, is not punishment. It is simply recognition, the moment the mirror arrives. When Nibiru returns, it will not ask for worship. It will ask for truth. And in that moment, the sky will not fall. It will open. The search for Nibiru has always been the search for ourselves. And maybe, just maybe this time, we will recognize the reflection. Fade out. A single heartbeat. Then silence.